Hi, good morning, and a very, very warm welcome to the last of our series of seminars on re-engaging and rebooting volunteering. In the session today, we're going to be looking at managing challenging conversations. So welcome this morning. My name is Colleen Williams, and I'm the Learning and Development Manager here at the Centre for Volunteering. And as always, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we find ourselves. I today am right near Kayamai Point on the southern part of the Northern Beaches, which is the land of the Kayamaigal people of the Eora Nation. We'd just like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge also the land our office is on, which is in the rocks, in the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Today, we're absolutely thrilled that you've joined us today. This is such an important seminar because we're focusing on these challenging conversations. And as we're rebooting and re-engaging our programs, we're seeing more and more that these challenging conversations need to happen. So we're seeing frequent changes and restrictions, new access and working conditions, particularly around the mandated vaccines, conditions of entries, and really has this potential to create this conflict as we see organisations re-engaging their volunteers and of course staff as well. So this morning we're going to look a little bit at how best to manage these conversations. And I'd like to introduce you to our facilitator for the seminar, who's best-selling author, coach, counsellor, educator, and all-round extraordinaire, Carrie Wallace. So Carrie's Business Enlighten New Solutions provides professional business coaching and marketing for small businesses, as well as empowering confidence coaching for individual professionals. And she, in 2020, achieved her lifelong ambitions and became a #1 best-selling author as well, with the release of her book, From Strangers to Clients. Carrie's worked with us for many years now. We're so thrilled to have her back again. Please join me in welcoming Carrie. And if you have any questions during the session, please do place these in the chat and we'll have a bit of a chance to, we'll monitor them as we go and we'll have a chance to catch those up after the session. Thank you so much and welcome, Carrie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colleen, and welcome and good morning to everybody. Let me just share my slides. Hopefully you can see the slides. If you can just give me a nod or a thumbs up to confirm that you can see them. Awesome, I'm seeing thumbs up there. Let me just arrange there's a lot of vids. I want to see as many of you as I possibly can. So, all right, so before we dive in, I want to invite you to take a walk with me just for a moment and imagine you are this person here and you are surrounded by people pointing fingers with angry expressions on their faces in your personal space, maybe even jeering at you. Type into the chat box, if you would, what your reaction would be. How would you feel if you were this person in the middle, surrounded by all these aggressive, angry, maybe even threatening people? How would you react? Type it into the chat box. Okay, Michelle's saying she'd feel bullied. Patrick, scared, overwhelmed, stressed. Yes, absolutely. Confused, embarrassed, crawl up in a little ball, frightened, angry. Awesome. Thank you, folks. Yes, defensive, all sorts of reactions. Thank you for joining in with that. It would be scary, wouldn't it? Hey? And I suspect, as Lachlan says there, overwhelmed and maybe attempt to withdraw. You're surrounded, Lachlan. You can't get out. You're trapped. It would be scary. And guess what? That's exactly the situation we're going to be looking at today. Hopefully not as threatening and scary as that particular situation, but throughout this 2-hour workshop, we're going to be looking at how you can manage those challenging conversations, whether it's with a customer, whether it's with a staff member. It doesn't actually matter who it is with. I'm going to share with you a number of strategies that's going to help you to navigate that often tricky, twisty, turny road that can be challenging conversations. Colleen introduced me earlier, and I thank you for that, Colleen. And the way that I empower resilience in my clients and the business that I have is through effective communication and helping people to manage conflicts using communication skills, conflict resolution, and problem-solving skills. And that's what I'm going to share a snippet. We've only got 2 hours this morning, but I'll share a snippet of that with you. So it's really important that everybody feels safe in your position, whether it's as a volunteer manager, whether it's as a volunteer, or indeed any situation. So the strategies that I'm going to share today will help you to remain calm when faced with a difficult situation, such as the one maybe that we've just had a look at. I'm going to be sharing an approach that is simple, easy to remember, and derived from conflict management, customer service focus. So it's really important when we are dealing with a challenging situation to be able to handle them in a way that is respectful, that encourages future participation, whether from a volunteer or if it's a member of the public, future visits to the facility or the service. We want everybody to have an enjoyable work experience, an enjoyable volunteering experience without incident, and with the confidence to feel that you can handle any situation that comes up. Now, we recognize that in this present climate of release from the COVID restrictions, tensions may well be running high. You only have to look at the news on any given day to see how high those tensions are in certain cohorts and parts of the population. So the focus today is very much on sharing practical tools that you can start implementing straight away. So throughout the morning, we're going to be having a look at perceptions and helping to understand what makes behavior challenging, what makes difficult behavior. We're going to have a very brief look at the current COVID rules and regulations, and of course, they're changing daily. We are not going to be looking at organisation policy and procedures. That was actually for another workshop that I ran for the National Trust. But we are going to focus on a simple model that will help you to support customers and volunteers in those difficult conversations. How you can maintain your personal safety, and you're going to get a chance to practice some of these techniques that we'll be sharing and talking about as we go through. So let's start. If you would imagine that somebody is shoving at you. Colleen, can you launch the poll? Because I've lost it just for a minute on the screen. I've got a lot of windows open on my screen. So there should be a poll coming up. Thank you, Colleen. I appreciate that. So what would you do if somebody approached you, maybe from that scenario that I painted earlier, and they come to shove you? They look as if they're going to shove you. What would you do? Let's have a look. We've got a number of answers coming in. We've got a large percentage of people that are saying they'd walk away. We've got about 60, 70% of people are saying they would walk away, 15% that they would push back, and 20% that they, or less, 17% now, that they would do nothing. The pushback percentage is rising. What have we got? We've got about 90% people have answered, and the overwhelming majority is to walk away. That might not always be possible. Thank you, folks. Thanks for your participation in that. It might not always be possible to walk away. And it's useful to bear in mind that it is human nature to either walk away or push back. If somebody feels threatened or their space is invaded, they're going to shove back a little bit or try and get away from it altogether. Hey. So it's useful to recognize this, and it's useful to recognize not only this reaction in ourselves, but it's also a common reaction in other people. So if we think about it, if a volunteer is asked to do something that maybe conflicts with their values or their belief system, we may well get some pushback, that angry response, maybe that snapped, irritated, irritable response. And the same, of course, with members of the public. If we're telling somebody that they can't have access to the service or to the site because they're unvaccinated, we may well get pushback. And we need to think how we can stop that instinctive pushback, that automatic reaction that happens without conscious thought very often, so that we can step back metaphorically, think objectively about the situation, so that we are then in a space where we are able to listen to what the other person has to say, what their viewpoint is, so that we can then respond in a constructive way. And that's what we're going to be exploring in today's workshop. Now, those of you that know me or have attended similar workshops before will know that I have a ton of images like this one. Can you type in the chat, what can you see? Just type into the chat one word, what can you see on this diagram, on this picture? Okay, we've got a lady from Clint, thank you. Old Andy, young lady from Patrick, thank you. A fancy lady from Vanessa, what else? A young lady, a woman, a lady with a hat, young lady. Oz Harvest is seeing a bird. Awesome. So actually, there is a young lady. We've got her nose here, her eyelashes here, her ear, her chin, the profile of her neck and chin, if you can see my cursor, and her hair, and then her fascinator or hat or whatever. There's also an old lady. So if you have a look, this is the hair of the old lady. This is now the nose of the old lady. That's one eye, that's the other eye of the old lady. And this is the chin, a very pointy chin, and the mouth of the old lady. So isn't that interesting? We're all looking at the same picture. Some people saw the young lady. Some people saw the old lady. Most people, I think, were saying the young lady. And a couple of people saw both. Same picture, but the perception different. So what about this one? Type into the chat what you can see in this one. Give you a minute to have a look at it. Stevie, lovely. Stevie said, can see Taylor Swift. Michelle's saying a man playing a saxophone, an instrument, a jazz musician. Lots of people are seeing the jazz musician. Some people are seeing the face. There is a lady's face, and it kind of does look like Taylor Swift, doesn't it? I hadn't thought that before. I hadn't seen that before, but it kind of does. So this is the lady's face, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the chin. And then this is the man with the saxophone. This is his hair, his nose. This is the top of the saxophone, the bottom of the saxophone, and his hands. And then that's his body and his feet. So again, interesting, isn't it? We're all looking at the same picture, and yet our perception is different. So what does all this have to do with a challenging situation or those difficult conversations? Well, the point is that just as with these optical illusions, what we might see as the truth in any given situation is likely to be different to what others might see as the truth. And just as with these images, we're all looking at the same image, whether people in this one saw the old or the young woman, you were both right. Everybody was right in what they were seeing, whether you were seeing a jazz musician or Taylor Swift or a face of a young woman, everybody was right. The thing is, they were simply different perceptions. And so it is with a challenging situation. Your perception of the situation may well be different to what somebody else's perception is. And it's not that one is right or one is wrong. The truth sits in between your story, my story, the other person's story. So what is it that makes us assume that what we initially see is the truth? And most people will work from the basis that what they see, that's it, that's the truth. And unless you've been to something like this, very few people will consider that there might be another way of looking at the situation. So if you imagine you're wearing a pair of glasses or sunglasses, and as you look around at the world, what we are seeing is filtered through the lens of the glass. True story? So imagine then if that sunglass or your glasses had a blue filter. What you are seeing is going to be tinted blue. And if somebody else was wearing a pair of glasses that had a pink filter, then what they are seeing is going to be tinged with pink. Again, looking at the same situation, but the filter through which we look at the situation is different. And the color of that filter is determined by a number of different things. Our culture is going to influence what we see as the truth, our perception in any given situation. Our upbringing is going to have a massive impact on our perceptions and what we see, our learning experiences. If, for example, we have been brought up in a household, in a family of origin, where arguments and conflicts were dealt with by shouting and maybe people withdrawing and walking away from a situation, then the chances are that is going to be our perception of how to deal with a conflict, how to deal with a difficult situation. We're likely to behave and have a similar perception as that of our family of origin, the experiences that we've had, and what the upbringing, what we've observed from other people that are close to us, other people that are important to us. And of course, our own set of personal values and beliefs, the beliefs that we hold about a situation, is going to play a significant part in how we perceive that situation and how we perceive other people's behavior. And typically, people only view a situation from their own viewpoint and will expect other people to react in the same way that we do. Many people are going to be unaware that there might be that different perception. So the first point to note is that if we can acknowledge that there are likely to be many different ways of looking at, of seeing the same situation, the same issue, then we're actually halfway there to resolving conflict. So let's get into our first group activity. My workshops tend to be very participative. I like everyone to get involved. It's not just about me talking. So our first group activity, and I'm going to put you into groups. There's a lot of people on the call. So I'm going to try and keep the groups as small as I can so that you get a chance to talk and interact with each other. But just because of the time limit of the workshop, it's not going to be possible to hear from all of your groups. So in a second, I'm going to put you in groups. If you can please discuss these questions. What behavior would you find challenging? What would you find difficult to handle? Whether it be from a staff member, a member of the public, a colleague, a peer, doesn't really matter who, but what sort of behavior do you find challenging or difficult to handle? And what is it that makes that behavior challenging for you? So how about, and I'm picking these numbers at random, there were 8 rooms. Who was the spokesperson for room 2, which had Clint, Oz Harvest, and Vicky MC. Who would like to be the spokesperson, or who was nominated the spokesperson for that group? If you can unmute yourself and share what you came up with in that group. So Clint, Oz Harvest, and Vicky MC. Have we got a spokesperson?
Sure. We sort of had technical difficulties, so we didn't really get a chance to do as much as we perhaps could have in 6 minutes. But anyway, aggressive behaviour and irrational behaviour were the two things that, angry, irrational behaviour were the two things that we kind of came up with that were hard to handle and to not react with the same feelings.
So responding in an angry way to that irrational behaviour, that irrational response.
Yeah, while trying to moderate your own sort of response.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was it? Were you able to discuss? I see Clint's comment there that he was in a very noisy office, so wasn't able to talk. Fair enough. What was it about, or what is it about irrational responses, angry responses, that makes it so challenging? Did you manage to discuss that?
We didn't quite get that far, sorry.
Okay, not to worry. No, not to worry at all. Let's have a look at group 3 then, which I had Lachlan, hope I'm pronouncing that right, do let me know. Lachlan, Rhiannon and Stevie. Who's the spokesperson for group 3?
We didn't actually end up choosing a spokesperson, so I guess I'll kind of throw myself on the sword here.
It's kind of you, Lachlan. Take it away.
Excuse me. For me, it was gaslighting. For the other two that were brought up was strawman arguments and confrontational.
Okay. And what was it about those behaviours that make them so challenging?
Sorry. The strawman arguments are just kind of, if I'm misunderstanding, please correct me, but it was about redirecting, I guess, or if I'm misremembering or stuffing this up, I probably am. I do apologise. For the gaslighting, it was the manipulation aspect and just trying to worm out of it. The confrontation wasn't gotten into too much. We did get a little bit sidetracked, but confrontational is, well, in my opinion at least, a pretty understandable one. I know a lot of people that shy away from confrontation, myself and one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Lachlan. And Michelle has asked, can you explain the straw man concept? So I don't know who in your group. Stevie, thank you.
Yeah, so basically a straw man argument is when you're talking about a specific topic and the person that you're talking about it with basically claims that you've made an argument you haven't made. And that allows it to redirect the conversation to this argument that you never made, which distracts against the original point that you were talking to. And it's often really hard to refocus the conversation back to the topic you wanted to discuss when someone brings in a straw man tactic. So I personally find that really difficult to cope with, because steering those conversations back can be really tough after that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like where people putting words into your mouth and you go, I didn't say that. That wasn't the point of what I was saying. Thank you for that, Stevie. That's awesome. And let's just take one more group. Group 8 was Michelle. I think there's a few Michelles, so I'm not too sure which one. Michelle, Nicola, and Pat. Do we have a spokesperson from group 8? If not, we'll move on.
Hi, it's Nicola here.
Hi, Nicola. Thank you.
Hi.
What did your group come up with?
We had boundaries and confrontational conversations where the other person possibly wasn't willing, well, they were willing to listen, but weren't accepting what was being said.
Okay.
we didn't get very far into it because both of us had some technical issues, all three of us, I'm sorry, and Pat was the only one that was fully functional, but it certainly, it highlighted some important challenges that we've all faced in our different roles.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Nicola. And it's the joy of working on Zoom, isn't it? Having technical
yes.
challenges, but don't worry.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will get through it. Don't worry. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And yes, difficult if we have those technical issues, but not to worry. This is being recorded. I don't know if the recording started again. Yes, it looks as if it has. All right, good. So we've got a common thread there, haven't we? That confrontational, where we feel people aren't listening to the point that's being made, or the straw man tactic where words are being put in our mouth and you go, well, hang on, that isn't what I was saying. The gaslighting, where really, really challenging behavior to deal with that manipulative type behavior. So let's have a look at what we can do. So we're looking at perceptions. We've started off thinking, well, what would it be like to be surrounded by people that are being very aggressive, angry? Let's look at these three individuals. We have this lady here who may come into your service, or maybe it's a staff member who arrives at work on a particular day, arms crossed, grumpy expression. We've got this gent here with really quite an aggressive expression on his face. And of course, we've got the teeth gritted, and I don't want to point at the screen, but that finger pointing behavior, which can be very challenging for many people. And we were saying earlier that many people, when faced with these difficult and threatening, potentially threatening behaviors, many people would want to walk away. So just type into the chat box, if you would, what you're feeling is going to be when you see this. How are you going to, what do you think is going on for these people? Just type into the chat box what you think might be going on and how you would feel if you were faced with a staff member or a member of the public that approached you looking like this. Angry, frustrated. Thank you, Rachel. Anger, Vanessa, thank you. Angry, aggressive, shocked. So we're thinking that they're angry, that they're aggressive, intimidated. It would be intimidating, wouldn't it, Tamsin, to be faced with somebody like that? And earlier, the first poll, we were identified that many people would want to walk away, to withdraw. Some people would push back. And in fact, those reactions of pushing back, walking away, or maybe even doing nothing are what are known as instinctive reactions. They are the typical fight, flight, or freeze reaction that I'm sure most of you have heard of. And it is the natural reaction to a challenging or a difficult situation. Now, just a little bit of science here. Don't worry, we're not going to spend too long in the science field, but it can be helpful to understand what's actually going on in our heads when we are faced with somebody that's really grumpy, or I can't do it because I tend to be quite a smiley person, but looking quite angry and maybe have that aggressive expression. It can be really challenging, and we often will react from instinct. And what we actually have in the brains, in the middle of the brain, there is a little part of the brain, it happens to be called the amygdala. And this controls whether we are reacting from instinct, which is really our emotional reaction, which sits in the brain stem. And this is where the fight, flight, or freeze response comes from. We are not applying conscious thought when we want to push back and maybe fight, or we get an aggressive response and we give an aggressive response back. Or if we want to just walk away, and I think we had some responses earlier where people just wanted to curl up in a ball and just leave me alone. These are all instinctive responses that come from the emotional core at the brainstem. What is not engaged is our thinking brain, which actually sits in the frontal lobe. Don't worry too much about the different parts of the brain if you don't want to. The point is, when we react from instinct, the amygdala is kind of like a little switch, and it switches off our rational thinking part of the brain, so that our reactions come from instinct, that fight or flight or freeze. I don't know what to do. What am I going to say? That type of response, which is quite common as well. So what we're going to be looking at after the break is some strategies that will help you to keep your rational thinking part of the brain switched on and stop the reaction coming from the emotional core, if you like, that instinctive reaction. Because what often happens, the consequences of an instinctive emotional response tend to be unhelpful and may even be destructive. So let's look again at these individuals. Now, would your reaction be different if I was to say this lady had just had an argument with her partner just before she came into your side or arrived at work, and the closed and grumpy expression is not actually directed at you at all or where she is. She's still thinking in her mind about the argument that she had with her partner. This gentleman, what would you think if I was to say he'd just eaten a sour piece of fruit, and his screwed face and type reaction is because he's just eating sucking a lemon type thing? And what would you say if I was to say that this guy is actually in a lot of pain? He has a chronic health condition where he suffers pain, and it causes his fingers to jitter, and he's talking through gritted teeth because he's in a great deal of pain. Just type into the chat box, yes or no. Would your reaction be different knowing now what you know about the background of these people? Would your reaction be different? Just type into the chat box, yes or no. Yes, yes, thank you, Gay, Vanessa, Rianne and Jem. Oh, wow, Pat, pretty much everybody, every response I can see. Thank you, Nicola, Ginny, Natalie, Clint, Stevie. Every response I can see is saying yes, of course. I think most people, knowing that different story, knowing the background, our reaction's going to be different. And this is the point, isn't it? So it can be useful to remember and bear in mind that it is very easy to get locked into our own perspective and forget that other people might have different views. It is very easy and almost instinctive for the human being to lean towards a negative assumption about other people. Think of those three characters that we've just had a look at. The instinctive response is a negative one, that their behavior is negative and directed personally. And yet we've just identified that the way we look at things can actually make a difference. So if we can acknowledge that there may be different ways of looking at the same event, those different perceptions, we're all looking at the same picture, we're looking at the same situation, but there can be different perceptions of that situation. And as we've just seen with the three characters, if we can understand a little bit about what's happening for the other person or what the other person's perspective is, it can help us to see beyond the immediate, the obvious, the situation at hand. And that can help us to understand what might really be going on. So how can we overcome our initial perceptions? Well, we need to take on board and remember these points that we've just talked about. And we need to work to see what is actually true and not just what appears to be true from where we're standing, from our position, from our perspective, from our culture, from our belief system, from our family of origin. we need to be objective, to look beyond that first initial response and initial thought that we might have. We need to think about our assumptions. What are we assuming to be true? What are you assuming to be true? And what else might actually be true? The situations that you were saying earlier in the groups, where a number of people were saying that you found it challenging if people were unwilling to listen. Well, what else might be going on? Is it that they're unwilling to listen, or is there something else underlying that, lying beneath the surface, so to speak, that might actually help us to see the situation from a different perspective? And to recognize that we all, ourselves, everybody in the situation, in the conversation, are likely to be distorting what we are seeing, what we are hearing, based on our own internal filters, as we've just been looking at, our culture, our belief system, our values, and so on and so forth. Can also be useful, thank you, Lachlan, thank you, Rachel. It can also be useful to recognize that it is actually the behavior that is the problem. It's not the person. It's very easy to categorize people. If we see somebody behaving in an aggressive manner, it can be very easy for us to think, oh, they're an aggressive person. Or if we see somebody arrive at work and they have a grumpy expression, oh, they're a grumpy person. Maybe they do it a lot. And it can be very easy to label them as a grumpy person, as uncooperative, as unwilling to listen. So it can be useful to remember and recognize that it's actually the behavior, it's the aggressive behavior that's the problem, not the person. And another underlying psychological fact, if you like, that can be useful to take on board is that all behaviors happen for a reason. Often aggressive behavior is a protective behavior. So again, if we see behind, if we recognize that what really is going on is likely to be different to what we perceive is going on, that there's going to be something sitting behind that apparent aggressive reaction or aggressive face or that finger pointing or the gritted teeth or whatever it might be. There is a reason for the behavior. So if we can seek to understand somebody else's perspective, the reason for the behavior, in other words, then we are likely to be able to create an atmosphere of cooperation, and that will reduce tension and de-escalate what could be quite a threatening and difficult situation to have. Because here's the thing, when we change our perceptions, because we can't change anybody else's, but when we change our own perception, we actually change our behavior. If we think that somebody is coming at us with aggressively and that we are going to be threatened, then we're likely to tense our muscles and get ready for that fight or flight. But if we change our perception to being one of, that's interesting, I'm seeing some aggressive behaviors there, I wonder what's going on, then our perception changes and our whole behavior changes. We're likely to present in a much more relaxed posture, much more open, much more welcoming. And that is likely to lead to a change in other people's behavior. Because here's the thing about human behavior. A lot of the communication kind of goes on under the surface. It isn't just the words that we say. They actually form a tiny fraction of a message that's communicated. It's everything in our body language, in how we are presenting, that actually impacts the message that is received. So if we change our perception, we change our behavior, our posture, our stance, then that's likely to result in other people changing theirs as well. So there are no difficult staff members, there are no difficult visitors, there are only difficult behaviors. So I'm not going to spend too long on this because I'm sure you've all had a look at the, certainly in New South Wales, the New South Wales website where the current COVID rules are. And of course, at the moment, we're currently sitting at over 90% vaccination rate. And at the moment, we still have these rules where non-vaccinated people are not allowed into many facilities, many places. But I was hearing on the news this morning that that looks to be changing, that the government the federal government, I'm understanding, are saying they really want the organisation to make up their own minds. And it is for each business, each organisation, each facility to decide whether they are going to allow unvaccinated staff to be working there or unvaccinated people to visit there. So I would encourage, to get the latest information, you're going to need to go to the government website, www.nsw.gov.au/COVID-19, and scroll down. There's a lot of information on that page. And if you just click on current or COVID regulations, current rules, you'll get the latest position from the government. And it's a good idea for each organisation, I'm sure, I know a number of them, organisations that you work for, have your own set of COVID rules. So just check what they are, because it is really important in the strategy we're about to look at that you understand what the rules and regulations are for your place of work, for your situation, for your facility. Now, there are just some pointers of things what not to do. Sometimes it can be just as helpful to know what to avoid as to think about what to actually do. It's a good idea, never get into an argument. Remember, everybody's likely to have a different perception. Maybe people have different views on vaccinations, on whether they should be vaccinated, on whether they should be allowed into a facility because they're vaccinated or unvaccinated. Chances are there's going to be as many people in the room, there are going to be that many different perceptions of any given situation. So never get into an argument over the rights and wrongs of the situation, over the rights and wrongs of vaccination, because everybody has a different perception and everybody is right in their own mind. It's important not to be angry or dismissive, and I'm going to share with you after the break some strategies that will help you with that. It's also important to not feel that you have to deal with it on your own. There will be supports in your organisation, and I'm sure you each know what they are for your own organisation, whether it's an escalation process that you know who to call on, or whether it's somebody that you can talk to after a situation to debrief, which is really important. If you have had or experienced a difficult situation and conversation, it's a really good idea. Just give yourself a moment, take a break. Give yourself time to reset, to kind of get back to you and your normal reactions, rather than sort of going from one, what might be difficult situation and bringing with you that negative, potentially negative energy into other conversations. Give yourself a break. If it's possible, if there are people to talk to, go and talk to somebody, let it out. All right. Now, this next is a little bit obvious, but I'm going to put it up there anyway. Really important to spot danger before it happens. Be proactive, not reactive, because everybody deserves to be safe. You, your visitors, your staff, your volunteers, of course. So it's really helpful to know the warning signs of danger so that you can be proactive. Now, quite clearly, if somebody's drawn a weapon, and oh my gosh, I sincerely hope that nobody ever has to experience that. But clearly that's a situation of danger and you are going to need to call for help. Do not deal with it on your own. But if somebody's advancing into your personal space, even when you step back, we had a number of people earlier saying they would want to withdraw. And what if somebody keeps advancing into your personal space? That can be very threatening. And that might be the time to call somebody else, to call for support, to call for help, to very clearly state, and I'll share with you the strategy how you can do that after the break, to very clearly state that this is not acceptable behavior. So, of course, there's 000 if it's an emergency situation. There is a non-urgent helpline of 131 444 that you might be able to call, or that you can call for support in a non-urgent situation. And of course, if a crime has been committed, if property's been damaged or worse, then of course 1-800-333 000. So let's take a break. And after the break, when we come back, we're going to be looking at this model that will enable you to handle those difficult situations calmly, to stay present, and to feel safe. All right, so I make it 10 past, so let's kick off again. So welcome back. I do hope everybody's managed to have some refreshment and a bit of a stretch. So what we're going to do in this second half of the workshop is really dive in and have a look at this model, what you can do, what can you do when you are faced with these difficult and challenging situations. Well, the very first thing, just as we were saying just before we went into the break, is to be very clear on what your role is and on what your organization's policies are, as well as the government's policies, certainly, of course, in relation to COVID. It's important as well to be clear on the rights and responsibilities of your visitors or your staff, and to be clear on your own rights and responsibilities. As we've said throughout, everybody has a right to feel safe in their workplace. This knowledge will form the foundation of how you can assertively communicate and respond in those difficult or challenging situations. So just pulling together some of the points that we were talking about before the break. Remember to avoid labeling the person. Separate the person from the behavior. It is not that somebody is an angry person. They are simply behaving in an angry manner at this moment. It doesn't mean they're a bad person or a difficult person. If we can seek to understand what might be going on behind the scenes, so to speak, seek to explain the behavior. Remember, all behavior serves a purpose. So if we can think what that purpose might be, why somebody might be behaving as they are, why might they be being aggressive or behaving in an angry way? If we can seek to understand that, then it removes our uncertainty. And it's that uncertainty that creates our anxiety. And if we feel anxious, if we see somebody behaving aggressively and we don't know why, we're not thinking what might be lying behind it, we're just responding to that aggression, we're likely to be responding in an anxious way that's tense, as we said earlier. We're either getting ready to fight or maybe to flee, or we're just going to freeze and think, oh, I don't know what to do. It is that anxiety that we might be experiencing that will actually then transfer to the other person and the behaviors escalate. And what we want to do is calm the situation and de-escalate. It's a helpful tip here is to use inclusive language. And I'll give you some examples of this in a little bit. So use inclusive language such as we. If we can focus on the positive, doesn't matter how small that positive is, any tiny little thing, if we can focus on the positive, it'll help to change the whole atmosphere of the conversation. And the more aware we can be of our own reactions and our own behaviors, the more in control we are going to feel. And if we feel in control, our anxiety reduces. If our anxiety reduces, so will the other person's or the other parties. So I've got a couple of acronyms for you to help you remember the strategies of what you can actually do. So imagine you're on a sailing boat, a beautiful boat. It's well, maybe not quite so clear blue sky in this picture, but imagine it's a clear blue sky and the sun is shining. Probably most people will feel calm and relaxed in such a situation. So what's the first thing that we need? To have a sailboat moving, because that's at the end of the day what we want to do, isn't it? We want to sail through any difficult conversation, feeling in control, arriving at a constructive and hopefully positive and productive outcome. So to be able to sail through a situation, a sailing boat is going to need air. So if we remember to breathe, it's going to relax us. And remember that little switch that we have in the middle of our brain, the amygdala? When we take that deep breath, when we are faced with a potentially threatening or certainly confronting situation, when we take that breath, we are keeping that amygdala switched so that our thinking brain stays engaged. And that leaves us in a position where we can then respond from a rational perspective, not that instinctive, often emotional response. That's what we want to avoid. So remember to breathe. And sail stands for, we want to step back to give ourselves that pause, that space, so that we can respond from our thinking brain. We want to acknowledge what the other person is saying or what we are seeing in the other person so that we can empathize with them. We want to provide information clearly and calmly. And we want to listen and consider the language that we are using. So let's walk through each of these. So the S, we want to step back. Remember to separate the person from the problem. It's not the person that's the problem. The problem is the problem. Create that sense of separation. That will help you to stay calm. If there are any issues going on in your home life, and geez, we all have things going on in our lives, don't we? We need to make sure and remember we leave those very firmly at home or outside of the workplace so that we can react from that calm, rational thinking perspective. And remember, although it may feel personal, it actually isn't. It's not about you. It's all about what the other person or other people are going through. It is all about their perception. Remembering these points are going to help us to stay objective and keep focused on the facts, focus on the current rules around COVID, the rules that your organization wants you to implement. So S, step back, create that space for yourself, create that space, separate the person from the problem. The A then is to acknowledge what the other person is expressing, to let them feel heard. Any situation where we feel somebody isn't listening to us, it's highly likely that it's because we're not listening to them. For somebody to hear what we are saying, to hear our message, we need to start by hearing them. Let them feel heard, whether this is one person or whether you're faced and surrounded by a group of people, as we were right at the top of the workshop. So we need to acknowledge and empathize. We want to acknowledge what they are saying. This will validate them as a person. And remember, when we validate, it doesn't mean we agree. We want to validate so that they feel heard. So, for example, you can say something like, I can see you're frustrated with the current government rules around the COVID vaccinations. Of course, you can make that context specific. Empathy, empathize with their position to show that you recognize what they're experiencing, recognize their feelings. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you. Empathy is the one skill that soothes. Now, this is not a workshop on teaching empathy. I teach counsellors for a year, 18 months, the skills of empathy. So empathy is a very highly advanced counselling skill. In a 2-hour workshop, I can't possibly teach you the skills of empathy. But what I am seeking to do is give you the elements that you need to enable you to soothe and calm a situation so that you feel in control. So acknowledge what the other person is going through. Empathize, reflect the emotion that you are seeing from them or that you are sensing from them. The I then is provide information, and this is why it's so important for you to know what the current rules and regulations are. And it is a moving platform at the moment, isn't it? So you're going to have to stay up to date. And when providing that information, use a calm voice, be factual, stay objective, stick to the facts. For example, we are mandated by government at the moment to refuse entry to anyone who is not vaccinated, or you could put in your company's policy if that's applicable. Be respectful. If you're talking to a member of the public who's taken the time to come to visit your site or visit your facility, it shows that they're interested in your facility. Remember, we want to pick up any small positive. So thank them for taking that time and effort. If it's a volunteer, thank them for wanting to work with your organisation. If it's a staff member, thank them for being there. Let them know that you are eager to welcome them back when the situation changes, when the government relaxes the regulations, or when your organisation's policy changes. This depersonalizes. This lets them feel respected, feel valued. And if somebody feels respected and valued, they are way less likely to be aggressive towards you or anybody else for that matter. So the I is provide information calmly, clearly, stick to the facts. Then the L is for listen and the language that we are using. So show an interest when they're talking. Maintain eye contact if you possibly can. If there's a group of people that you're faced with, then look at them each in turn. Ask what's known as open questions. So what brings you here? What's your interest? What is it that you're looking for? Again, all behaviors serve a purpose. So they're there for a reason. What is it? Because maybe you can help them meet that need in a different way. If you can't allow them in the facility, maybe there's some information, a brochure or a website or another facility or some outdoor venue that they might be able to go to. Use what's known as a non-verbal encourager. And all I'm talking about here is nod your head. Go, show an interest in what they're saying. Use, as I've said before, that inclusive language. We are mandated by government. We are mandated by our company to insist that all staff members are vaccinated. Use we, that depersonalize it. It's not you making up the rules. We have to abide by the rules. It creates a different atmosphere. Think about the person's first language. Maybe information needs to be provided, and I'm sure it already is around COVID and the rules around vaccinations. Maybe have leaflets available in the languages, the common languages of people that are visiting your facility, of your volunteers, of your staff members.
Oh, come
Remain.
on, Bella.
Oh, somebody needs to mute themselves out, if you would, please. Thank you, Michelle. Remain neutral. No judgmental comments. Good, bad, positive, negative, these are all judgmental. So keep the language neutral. And I'll give you examples in a second. And think about how you're speaking, the tone of your voice, the pace. Quite often when we're nervous, what people do is we tend to rush because we're nervous and we want to get it out. So slow it down. Think of the tone, think of your pace, think of the volume. We don't want to be shouting at people. So these are things to consider in how we listen to what they're saying, and then how the language, what we use to convey any message that we may want to convey. So the second acronym I have for you, which is really getting into the meat of what exactly can you say, is ER. If you want to think of it as an emergency response, that might be helpful. So pulling it all together, the E is that empathy, acknowledging somebody else's perspective, their views, and what they might be feeling. And the R is for repetition, repeat the rules, the government rules, the regulations, the policies of your organization. ER. So let's have a look in a second at some practical examples. But just before we do that, I just want to look at this word empathy. Can you type in the chat box what you understand empathy to be? I've just said I can't possibly teach empathy in a 2-hour workshop, but I just want to see what the start position, if you like, is. So just type into the chat box what you understand empathy to be. Just give you a minute to type in. Understanding how someone feels from Clint. Ginny's saying seeing something from the other person's point of view, putting yourself in their shoes, Tamsin. Absolutely good, good, awesome. So empathy is really the best way that we can get our point across, by taking the other person's perspective. We started at the top of the workshop, didn't we, by recognizing that we can all look at the same situation, and yet we'll all have likely to have different perspectives on it. So the best way to get any message, anything that we want to convey across, is to first put ourselves in their shoes, to take their perspective, to show them that you recognize what they're thinking, their perspective, even if that view is different from your own. And that's the key. So perspective taking, as it's sometimes called, is often referred to as putting yourself in the other person's shoes. In other words, to empathize. There's actually a lot more behind it. And as Chrisma said back in 1988, to empathize is to respond to another person's perceived emotional state by experiencing feelings of a similar sort. And it is quite an advanced skill. But what I'm going to show you, and what there's a handout that goes along with this that Colleen will send out to you afterwards, that gives you a whole ton of different phrases that you can adapt to your own language, to your own style of speaking, but it gives you those practical things that you can say. So let's have a look at some examples. So remember, you're confronted with a difficult situation. You want to empathize and repeat. And the infinity symbol is very deliberate because you are going to keep going through that loop. Let's have a look. So let's say somebody comes up or somebody wants to gain access to your facility, and you've asked them to show proof of vaccination. And they've responded with an angry outburst saying they've got a right to be allowed into your facility. They have to be allowed in. It's not up to you. You have to let them in. So you've got that angry response. You want to ER, give your emergency response, empathize, acknowledge their views. For example, I can see how upset or angry or sad, whatever the emotion is that you can see. I can see how upset you are by this. I can't imagine what it must be like to be refused entry. But the situation is, I'm afraid, that we are mandated to follow the government health orders. Inclusive language, we are mandated to follow the government health orders, or of course you can put in there your own organisation's policies. Let's say they respond to this, but I'm a regular. Surely you can let me in. You know me. I'd come to your service. I support you. I've supported you for years. This is outrageous. So you get that sort of response. It's very difficult for me to do an angry response because I'm not feeling angry at all. So how can you respond? You do your emergency response. You empathize. You acknowledge what they've said, their views, their feelings. For example, I get how frustrating this must be. You are a highly valued customer, and we look forward to welcoming you when the regulations change, or we look forward to when we can welcome you back. Remember that positive, no matter how small. We look forward to seeing you again when the regulations change. But the situation is, at the moment, we have no choice but to follow the government health orders. And you might want to say you're sorry. Totally okay to say that in the repeating the rules, and you keep going through that process, bouncing from the E to the R. Empathize and acknowledge their views, and then repeat the regulations. So to empathize, you want to think about what it would be like to be in their situation. As Ginny said, I think it was Ginny, apologies if it wasn't, as Ginny said just a moment ago, put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel if you weren't allowed to volunteer at the place that you've been volunteering for years, or if you weren't allowed to enter a place that you might have supported or you might have traveled 2 hours to get to? You're likely to feel pretty peed off, aren't you? Hey, I know I would. So think about and identify what they could be experiencing, and then state it. Remember that but that leads you into repeating the rules, the regulations, clearly, calmly, well-paced, while holding your ground and maintaining eye contact. Now, it's difficult to do not an in-person workshop, but how you present and taking that deep breath. If you see people coming, maybe, and you think, oh my God, and that thought going through your head is, oh, we're in for a, this could be tricky. That's the moment to take your breath. That gives you that time to center. Remember, E-R, empathize, repeat. Okay, that's what I need to do. Now, what are they going to say? Empathize, acknowledge and validate their response, and repeat the rules and regulations. And you keep bouncing between the two. So let's put this into practice. How are we doing for time? All right, we're doing all right. So just a few minutes for this. I'm going to try and put you into pairs. I don't know if there's a limit on the number of rooms. We'll find out in a minute. So imagine you have a staff member who tells you that they refuse to turn people away. They tell you that they refuse to get vaccinated themselves. Now, your company policy in this example is that all staff and volunteers must be vaccinated, and that no unvaccinated people are allowed to enter the premises. That's your policy, that's your rule. You've politely informed them of your company's policy, but they are now shouting at you, excuse me, I'm going to swear, bloody vaccinations. Don't you realize how dangerous they are? I'm not vaccinated and refuse to be, but I have a right to work and I refuse to turn anyone away. So you've got that angry response. Your challenge in your pairs is to come up with what you would say, empathize, and then repeat the rules. Empathize, acknowledge their position, being calm, take that breath maybe first of all to calm you, to give you that space and pause to think about your response. Empathize, acknowledge what they've said, and repeat. Repeat the rules and the regulations. All right, so I'm going to put you into pairs, bear with, while I just set up the breakout rooms, and we'll go probably for about 5 minutes for this one. Okay, so I've got 11 breakout rooms because I want you to be in pairs. If for whatever reason, if technically you haven't got anybody in your room, come back into the main room, let me know, and I'll see if I can put you into another room. There is no mechanism to share that slide in the breakout rooms. When you share slides, they don't always work. So if you can just maybe take a note of that scenario, or maybe use one of your own scenarios. Somebody has responded in an angry, aggressive, or threatening manner, or maybe you feel that they're gaslighting or coming up with the strawman arguments. Empathize and repeat. Give it a go, see how you get on. So let me create the rooms. So we'll have 5 minutes or so for this, and then we'll just share a couple of responses to see how you got on. Let's see how some people got on. So I've got in group 3, in room 3, we had Nicole and Rachel. Are you able to share your experience and how you found it?
Yeah, certainly. Well, Nicole and I had a really interesting discussion. Nicole is with Oz Harvest, and obviously they now have the task ahead to ensure that all volunteers are vaccinated, and that's going to be, they're going to come up with a system whereby if they're not vaccinated, they can't then sign on for a shift. And then in terms of this staff member situation, we were saying that this directive, if you were in an office situation where there was only a few of you in the office and you were all on an equal standing, they were your peer, so to speak, it would be a very difficult conversation and you would have to implement the ER. If you were able to, it would be good if a more senior member of staff could deal with this. I feel that that may have more, carry more weight with that individual if they were just saying no, they wouldn't get vaccinated and they wanted to insist on coming into the office.
Awesome, absolutely. And remember, as we said at the start, you don't have to deal with it on your own. So if you feel that the situation would be appropriate to escalate it, then escalate it. But implement that ER, empathize, acknowledge that they don't want to get vaccinated. Remember, it's not comparing your opinion of vaccinations to their opinion. That's actually not the point at all. It is simply acknowledging and validating whatever somebody's perspective is and repeating the rules. The rule is at Oz Harvest that we have, everybody, all staff, all volunteers have to be vaccinated. And then maybe that would be the opportunity to introduce to somebody else. Awesome, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. And then I had group 9 was Gemma and Michelle. Are you able to share how you got on practicing ER? I don't know which Gemma it was. I know there's a few Gemmas.
I'm happy to speak, Carrie.
Thank you, Michelle.
I just stepped aside for a minute, but we just discussed, what that would be like quickly at the last minute, and decided that, we would acknowledge it, and we would then ask, maybe, is there an option for them to, while we empathise, was there an option for them to work from home or something? So until things change.
Yeah, awesome. So you were looking at, well, how can we, what's the need? What does the person need? What's the reason for the behaviour? And how can we meet that, whether it be working from home? How did you feel, Michelle and Gemma, by starting from that position of validating and empathising? What do you think it would do for you?
Well, I think you're saying it out loud to yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And take the heat out of the situation.
It does, doesn't it, Gemma? Absolutely spot on. And that's what we're seeking to do. We want to de-escalate. We want to calm things down. Awesome work, ladies. Well done. Thank you for that. How are we doing? I'd so love to spend longer hearing some feedback, but there's just a couple more points. That's from another one. Couple more points just to cover. So in your worksheets, in your handouts, as I said earlier, there's a ton of different phrases that you can take, you can adapt, make them your own. And what I would always encourage is have a few stock phrases. And I've just got a few here. We highly value your custom long to welcome you back. If it's a volunteer, we love having you working with us. We can't wait till you can come back. Something that is focusing on the positive, whatever it might be. I appreciate how frustrating this must be, and so on. So there's a number of phrases here. You'll get a copy of the slides. And as I say, in the handout, there's a whole page of different phrases, different ways to acknowledge, different phrases that you can use and, of course, adapt to make your own. I did just want to cover, we looked earlier at some things not to do. And we've been talking about the importance of validating. And as Gemma was saying just then, it takes the heat out of a situation. So I wanted to just touch base on what would put heat into the situation and what would cause it to escalate. The handout hasn't come out yet, Michelle. That will be sent out after the workshop, after we finish. So don't worry about that. It's coming, it's on its way, or it will be afterwards. So what not to do? Yes, Michelle, absolutely. We don't want to be defensive. And some invalidating phrases that sometimes well-meaning people might say are things like, don't worry about it. That's likely to inflame the situation, isn't it? Calm down. Please don't say that. If we tell somebody to calm down, the chances are they're going to just get angrier and behave in a more aggressive manner. Turn that frown upside down. Oh my gosh, you shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't let it bother you. These are disempowering statements. Nobody else feels like that. All the other volunteers are fine with it. That is going to isolate the person, and that is not likely to calm. So these are things not to do. The big red cross. Please don't use these phrases. It'll be okay. You should just forget about it. It can't be that bad. Please don't use these invalidating phrases. Focus. I won't go back to it, but focus on those phrases that show that you acknowledge what they're going through, what they're experiencing. And I just want to end up with having a little look at what you can do that will help you handle maybe fears, that sense of panic, maybe that anxiousness that might come, maybe stress that might arise from handling these situations. So here are some strategies that you can use that are going to help you deal with any emotions that come up in yourself. So the first one is to do what's called grounding. And I've already mentioned just simply taking a breath gives you that space to pause, keep the amygdala switched to the thinking brain so that your response can be from that rational thinking part of your brain, then that's going to make it far more constructive. But apart from just taking a deep breath, another quick thing that you can do to ground yourself is to just look around the room and just note mentally what you're seeing. Note what you're hearing, any sounds that you might be hearing. Maybe you could divert your attention for a moment to your toes in your shoes. If you're stood or sitting at work, these are things that you can do in that situation. Divert your attention to your toes. What do they feel like in the shoes? Wiggle them a little bit. Does your shoe feel soft? Does it feel hard? Can you feel the end of the shoe? Just put your focus onto something incredibly mundane, such as your toes in the shoes or what you can see and hear in the room around you. It'll give you that space. And that space gives you pause to think what your reaction is. And in that thinking, remember your emergency response. Empathize, acknowledge and validate what they've said, and repeat your rules and regulations. I've mentioned this one before. Slow it down. Gives you space to think, but it also gives the other person space to think as well. And if you're standing or sitting, stand tall. Have your shoulders down. Keep your chin up. And it might be helpful, a tip that I was taught, oh my gosh, so many years ago, when I first started public speaking and was faced with these massive audiences. Imagine a golden thread is holding you up, coming from the neck of your jacket or shirt or whatever, and is holding you up. So maybe you might feel like crumpling, and some people earlier were saying they wanted to just curl up. So imagine you've got this golden thread that is supporting you. Hold your space. Have your hands maybe sort of intertwined or just calmly held. I don't know if you can see that on the Zoom, down at a comfortable position so that you are presenting a confident, comfortable persona. You might not be feeling confident inside and you might not be feeling comfortable inside, but present as comfortable. Slow it down. I can see this would be incredibly annoying and frustrating. I can't imagine how irritating it must be for you. But at the moment, the company policy is boom, boom, boom. Empathize, repeat, and keep going through that loop. And you may have to go through that loop several times. Okay, each time you're responding to what they've said, validating what they've said, and repeating the rules. We've talked about that. Staying neutral, using that neutral language. Be calm, breathing will help. Avoid defensiveness, as Michelle said earlier in the chat box. Absolutely, it's not about you. It's not personal about you. Chances are they don't really know you that well, certainly if it's a member of public, even if it's a volunteer or a staff member. And remember to be gentle with yourself. We're only human. Okay, give yourself that time to take those regular breaks. Give yourself time to notice what your own emotional reaction is. As I said earlier, the more self-aware that we can be, the more in control we're going to feel. Okay, so there are no bad emotions. We need to recognize what it is. What is our emotional response? Are we feeling scared or panicky? Where does that come from? And maybe look at that. So maintain your self-awareness. And you can use something like a journal or maybe debriefing, just talking with a colleague or your supervisor or a peer or a family member. Talk with somebody to debrief so that you get that chance to express, God, I felt really scared. But I managed to stay calm and I managed to validate what they were saying and repeat. Give yourself that opportunity. So be gentle with yourself. So I think, yay, I've left a few minutes for questions. So type them into the chat box. I can't see hands because I can only see about half of you, I think, on my screen. But just if you've got a question, unmute or type into the chat box and just let me know what's been most valuable for you from our time together today, or indeed any other questions that you might have. I'll just give a minute for people to type in or ask any questions. I'm not seeing any questions coming through as yet. Let me know what's been most valuable for you from our time together today. Tamsin, thank you. So Tamsin's asking, great question, Tamsin, thank you. How can you shut down the ER cycle if it keeps going? Well, there will be a reason that it keeps going. So you might want to ask yourself, what is lying behind this? What is going on here? If you feel you're sort of in a loop and it's not really getting anywhere, then you can simply ask a question of the person. So what would you like to do next? Or what do you need in this moment? That's a great question to ask. If you're going around that loop and you've repeated the rule, so tell me, what do you need right now in this moment? And then if at all possible, meet that need, and that's going to close the conversation down productively. In my experience, and I've worked with many organizations and individuals over the years and personally, probably, well, I'm not going to say a number of repetitions because it will vary, but keep repeating it, it's going to close down in a constructive, positive way. It may be that you need to escalate or involve somebody else if you feel that you might not be perceived as a position of authority, but the ER strategy will work whether you're in a position of authority or not. Lots of questions. People are saying, okay, SAIL and ER, lovely, Ginny, thank you. Avril, great to have some strategies to deal with. Awesome, thank you for that comment. Alice, I really like the SAIL technique, fabulous. The acronyms were particularly useful. Thank you, Clint. Sorry, did somebody?
Yeah,
yes, go on.
Just keep teenage things, but sorry, I'm just in a Zoom training too. I've got to scoot. All right, thanks. Bye.
So I'll just mute Michelle out there. I think we were hearing another part of another conversation there. Michelle's saying, I found the tip to remember. It's not the person, it's the situation. Lovely. Thank you, Michelle. And Lachlan, very much enjoyed how applicable it is. Good. Even outside of difficult conversations. Yeah, absolutely. Any, think of your personal life. Think of any situation where you're faced with other people and there may be disagreements. You can use this same strategy. Colleen's saying it's not the person, it's the problem. She likes that. I know she's heard me talk many, many times, haven't you, Colleen? So you know that one. You've heard it many times. Awesome. Any other questions that are coming through? Otherwise, I will look to wrap up. I've got a quote for you to finish with. I'll just check and see. I'll scroll back up. See, check I haven't missed any comments. Don't think so. Tracy, absolutely 100% agree. Tracy is saying all everyone really wants is to feel validated. So these techniques work well. Spot on, Tracy. And that's exactly right. If you think about what works for you, you want to feel heard, don't you? You want to feel that your view is recognized. And remember, we don't have to agree with somebody to validate what they're saying. Really, really important. Fabulous, Tracy. Thank you. Colleen likes the focusing on the toes. Going to try that one. Awesome. I love it. All right, so let's look to wrap up the workshop. It's been a real pleasure working with you all this morning, and it's an amazing group. I normally like to have a lot more conversations with people, but it's a bit challenging when there's a large number. But I hope you feel heard and have had an opportunity to express your thoughts and ask your questions that you wanted to. And I will just, before I do the quote, just want to touch on the gaslighting and the strawman arguments. I hope you can see that the technique ER will work just as well. In the strawman in particular, if they're trying to deflect into something else, acknowledge that. I get that you want to move the conversation to whatever this topic is, but, and then repeat your perspective or the message that you wanted to send, or the thing that you wanted to say, and keep bouncing between the two. And the same with gaslighting. I can see that whatever it is, but, and then you express your point of view. So empathize, acknowledge and validate what the other person has said, repeat your perspective or the rules and regulations. What's that you've put in there, Colleen?
I was going to finish up when you were done, but
okay, no, that's fine.
It's just a little plug.
All right, not a problem. I've just seen the link go there. Let me do this quote and then I'll hand it back to Colleen. So Carl Buchner said, they may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So with that thought in your minds, again, I want to thank you. Thank you for your participation. It's been fabulous to see all the chat comments and the thoughts coming back from the breakout rooms. It's been a real pleasure, and enjoy. The handout will be coming out to you, and the slides as well in the next day or so. But let me hand back to Colleen for now.
Just to say thank you so much, Carrie. I know you've made me feel calm, confident, collected. It's lovely to hear you and get these top tips on managing these challenging conversations. I think it helps us all feel a bit stronger about going forward. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I will just say that we've got also a session outside of our monthly Volunteer Managers Forum is coming up this Thursday as well. It's with gig buddies who've been really inventive throughout this COVID period and looking at their programs in re-engaging volunteers and keeping volunteers engaged through COVID and ongoing. So that's really exciting. Rebecca and her colleague will be with us on Thursday to talk about that. So please book in. That link is in the chat. I'll post it again. But if you could, if you want to register for that, so that's 3 p.m. on Thursday. And just to say thank you again, Carrie, for your time. And I'll send you all those that were in attendance a copy of the slides and the handout with some top tips. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.